want to welcome you, Dr. Cretella. And can you, for listeners, share who you are and a little bit of your background, just briefly?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Michelle Cretella. I'm the Executive Director of the American College of Pediatricians. And I practice in general pediatrics for 17 years, doing everything from prenatal visits with parents, so basically from newborns through age 21. I was a college university physician at one point as well. So the full gamut, and I have a particular interest in behavioral health in both children and teenagers.
Well, and one reason I wanted to talk with you is I wrote a book about my own experience. I grew up in the 70s, but really I had an eating disorder in the 80s from about 13 to 19. And I'm, older now and I can see it with a different perspective. And when I was working on the book, a lot came up of these different ideologies that I was exposed to that affected me. And I know that you've talked about how today we were going to look at the transgender issue because it's the statistic from the Journal of Adolescent Health found that 16% of transgender college students have an eating disorder.
Right. And
I wanted to see, I know you've talked about reality testing, and I feel there's a connection, but I wanted to hear your take on it.
So I think we are in a culture that I think is heavily driven right now by identity politics and also the need to root all behavior in biology. And because there's this desire to we don't want to make people feel bad. We don't want to make out of a desire to avoid hateful behavior or hateful judgments, which is good. That's a good desire. We are reducing everything to identity politics and trying to say that all behavior is just innate and present, either before or at birth. And this is simply scientifically not true. There are two things that we can definitively say you are born with. You are born with your skin color. I mean, there's not that these are the only two, but you are born with your skin color. You are born with your sex. Why? Because those are determined by genetics alone. Those are biologically determined. And so to get to your point about reality testing, when we take little children, preschool, elementary, even teenagers, and we tell them the ridiculous lie that you may have been born into the wrong body, that messes with the most fundamental level of reality testing. Especially if you look at little preschoolers young kids. I mean, our physical bodies that's sort of one of the first physical realities we're in touch with, and if we can't trust our own bodies to tell us who or what we are, then what can we trust? So
yeah. And when I wanted to throw in there was a lot of room for girls to be tomboys. I was definitely a tomboy. I like to be outside all the time. And I just reflect on what might have happened to me if I had thought that maybe I was a boy trapped in a girl's body. It's, and
it's really ironic, right? Because when I was growing up in the 70s too, and we were trying to get away from the sex stereotypes then, and now with identity politics, particularly the transgender movement, they're basically enshrining stereotypes and saying, oh, your physical body doesn't matter. You know, you're physically you're a boy, but you like pink chiffon and you like dancing and cooking. Oh, you're a girl trapped in a boy's body. That's crazy. And to have these social pressures culturally to have children growing up with that idea that sex stereotypes override your biology is dangerous.
Well, and I was reading some of the material because the eating disorder specialist community seems they're all in with this. I hear a lot of the language of non-gender conforming, and I was reading about a young college student who was struggling to achieve the non-binary ideal, and out of that came his eating disorder.
Yeah.
So it's another ideal that they're putting out there, but what's strange about this ideal is that it's so subjective. How is someone going to achieve the look of a boy down to not being able to pass? And as you're saying, you know, it's never going to reach the level of the genetics. And
right. And I think what's so, it makes sense that there's overlap between anorexia and the gender confusion. I almost, gender dysphoria, I almost want to use loosely because it makes sense because although boys, and I have had boys who had eating disorders, but it still is predominantly, there's a preponderance of girls, and it makes sense because the girls oftentimes, they may be dealing, they're dealing not only with maybe issues of feeling like lack of control. There may be some psychodynamic underlying difficulties between either mother and daughter or other family members, but the social ideal, right, that's being broadcast everywhere toward girls being thin, slender. I think the preponderance of even pornography plays into what can drive young women to be restrictive in their eating,
Go ahead.
They have another avenue in which to act out, so to speak. So it's another ideal. The new ideal now is non-binary. It's the underlying issues are still there, and they need to be addressed. Simply, telling the young woman or the young man, who's dealing with an eating disorder, oh yes, you feel non-binary. Oh yes, that's it. This is going to solve everything. No, whether you're dealing with your traditional anorexia, bulimia, or gender dysphoria, there are underlying issues there that need to be addressed.
And one of the experiences or things I've noticed, like my sister was talking in front of her preteen daughter about how she would like to get a breast reduction. And I just noted that because I think when you're in that transition, and I felt this, I gained a lot of weight. It's difficult to then, I know that there's some binding of the breasts, and it's for someone who, it's kind of curious because it does go against this idea that your body can be accepted at any way it is. It is an impossible ideal.
Mm-hmm. Right. In the same way that the typical idolized Hollywood model or actress is an impossible ideal, right? The svelte figures. In your email, you also mentioned to me contradictory in a sense that we're now seeing, well, it may have started with a movement to end body shaming, right? Which, again, there's some good in that. We don't want to unjustly discriminate or harass people who are overweight, but I can't remember exactly how many.
Yeah, I was talking about something that's popped up lately, the fatphobia, which means fear of fat people, but from my perspective, we've had a lot of the food, and I hear nutritionists talking about fatphobia, but what happened to the discussion about the addictive food, the standard American diet,
Right.
and then when you look at what like Sports Illustrated and Cosmopolitan recently had larger women, but
Right.
those, what people I think don't understand is that those are part of I heard you mention in a video, top-down structure of media. That it's not, there's a lot of trends that aren't organic, that that are percolating, and then people seem to grab them, and of course you want everyone to feel good, but it's almost like there's a fat fetish. I hate to say that because it sounds mean, but when you look at, like, we need, I was never overweight with my illness. I was never underweight. It doesn't always look
right.
the way you think it does.
Mm-hmm. That is true. Right. So I think what we're seeing, it really again comes to identity politics. But what I found interesting when I looked into this a little bit, fat phobia used to refer to those with eating disorders who they expressed a fear of becoming fat, and so they were doing restrictive dieting or maybe abusing water pills or laxatives, for example. So this is going back a few decades. Fat phobia meant that. But now it's sort of been grafted into the identity politics kind of movement, and fat phobia has been morphed into, oh, you all are afraid of fat people. And being big and beautiful is almost taking on, like, an identity, like, oh, is this going to be the new civil rights category? I'm just positing that. I'm thinking sort of out loud that, this may be some of what we are seeing. And it's what I hope we would do in medicine and then as a culture is take a step back and say, well, hold on. Okay, as you're pointing out, there is such a thing as a healthy diet and the need for a healthy exercise. We have to understand, we can understand that people have a different biological makeup, and so we're not all going to have the same body shape, even if we all have the same healthy diet and healthy exercise. However, no one must be obese. Do you kind of follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I hope that, it's not necessary to politicize everything. In this case, to politicize being overweight or obese.
And then it's
detrimental to everyone.
Right, and it's kind of the swinging to the other extreme from the super emaciated models.
Right.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and we grew up in the same, close to the same generation. And I think it's so the kind of social engineering, or whatever ideologies, the identity politics. It seems like the stakes are really high because I've seen some of these teenagers who've realized and have kind of come back to their original gender.
Okay.
and the one that you had posted on your website, and it seems like, can you speak to that? How when you're so young and your identity is so fluid at that time, and you make these permanent changes, it's tragic. And can you speak to that? Because there's physical changes that young people are making that may affect how long they live, even.
Right. So some of the young women who transitioned, meaning they went ahead and took puberty blockers and or just testosterone. So these are young women who did this as teenagers. Generally, they would have started around age 15, 16, got into their 20s. Some of them early 20s, others closer to age 30, then suddenly realized, wait a minute, I always was a woman, I still am a woman, and the handful that I'm thinking of now do identify as lesbian. Some of them also now they're faced with, I have from testosterone a permanently lowered voice. I have a 5 o'clock shadow I have to deal with every day. Some of them had double mastectomies, right? So no breasts. And some of them they likely have infertility. I say likely because if you get the combination of the puberty blockers and the testosterone, you will be infertile. But there are some women who, if they were on testosterone alone, fertility may come back, but we don't know. So there's, these are huge side effects that they had no way of comprehending when they were teenagers. And in some cases, they weren't even told, that this was a possibility, because our entire culture is saying, hey, this is who you really are. Go with your feelings. Trust your feelings. And this is going to, these drugs and these surgeries are going to make you happy. These are the answer to all of your angst. And I said to people, okay, you guys remember when you were teenagers, right? Did you were you always happy as a teenager? Were you happy with yourself physically? I mean, I've never met a teenager who was perfectly happy with their body or not dealing with some sort of angst one day. I mean, the whole job of a teenager is to figure out who they are, who they're going to be, and it's all about trying out different roles and forming their identity. They don't know exactly who they are yet. So that's a stage where we as adults need to be protecting them from permanently harmful choices, such as things like testosterone for girls or estrogen for boys, and the surgeries that are removing. You just can't go down the street and order yourself up a new set of breasts. I mean, the fact that what one of the leading transgender pediatricians said, well, you can just get a pair. You can go out and get a pair if you change your mind later. Like, okay, what planet are you from? It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, I see we're running out of time, but I wanted to just see if you had any thoughts on orthorexia nervosa. It's kind of a new label that I hear nutritionists talking about how don't overthink what you're eating. It seems to be another kind of pathology. What do you think?
I don't know that we need to keep coming up with new names for things. I think it's more the same. I guess it's probably not quite a body dysmorphia. I almost see it more as
OCD or
OCD.
Yeah.
Thank you. Obsessive, obsessive compulsive behavior, and for whatever reason, those individuals are zeroing in on I want to be healthy. And I do know I've met a few young men like this, and I would say in them it's more of an OCD kind of thing. They have certain personality traits that I would sort of lump it together with that.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. And then finally, it seems, what do you think of this, when I was, there wasn't a label, like you say, there wasn't a label when I had bulimia in the 80s. Okay, and well, when I first, they may have come up with it during that time. My mother didn't really even know what it was, but and she never came forward, and I never got help from adults at that time. But I just wanted to ask you about. I see now that they're talking about genetics as a cause of eating disorders, and wanted to get your take on that. My sense is that a lot of this has to do with the intensity of the media culture and kind of the obsessions that it creates and the focus on image. But what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you, and I'm so glad you ended with that, because I started in the beginning talking about how I think our culture wants to root everything in genetics. So basically, we are made of DNA. So sure, there are genetic predispositions, maybe genetically influenced personality traits, temperaments, right? But that by itself does not predestine us to become bulimic, to become anorexic, to have gender dysphoria, to become an NBA basketball star. Okay, so in other words, yes, our genetics matters, but it's one piece. It's one piece of the puzzle.
Well,
and I agree with you. There is no question that especially the media. In our day, growing up, it was predominantly television, magazines, and movies. Now, of course, we have the internet and messages you're getting in schools, etc. Absolutely. Psychosocial influences are huge. They're absolutely huge. And if the culture changes, you'll still see mental illnesses, but the mental illness may change if there are different messages coming from the culture.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, because I still am very obsessive with my thinking, and I can, and I see how that trait combined with stress in the household and media messages combine to create that. And I think it's much more, the stakes are higher, and the media is much more aggressive, and there seems to be a woman who did a study on 17 magazine. I wrote about this in the book, said that it's almost like the culture is teen now. Like, it's centered on teenagers, and there's a lot of language. They feel like they're being consumed themselves. Like, and there's this. They see this like little window where they need to become something great, because then their star falls. So it's kind of profound, and like you said, we need to. That's one reason why I wanted to have you on to talk about this and the connection with eating disorders, and I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been really enjoyable.
Oh, thank you so much. I think you've made a lot of really important connections, and I think your experience is backed by there's lots of good science to indicate how heavily influenced teenage behavior, adolescent behavior is by things like the internet and all forms of media, as well as their peer groups. That's backed by science. So the connections that you're seeing and sort of perceiving even from your own experience, it does go along with what's in the literature. You're in good standing.
Good, yeah. Well, thank you, and enjoy your day. Hope you're staying cool. And
thank you.
Yeah, and be well. Thanks again for coming on.